Hi, everybody, and welcome to my weekly cult situation report. I am Daniella Mestyanek Young, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, and the author of a critically acclaimed book called Uncultured, which is growing up in the Children of God religious cult, going into the cult of the U.S. Army, where I was Captain Mestyanek and one of the first women in deliberate ground combat in U.S. Army history. And comparing those two while I watched a cult leader run America, which I'm very much hoping will not happen again. Every Friday in the military, every officer gives a roll-up, a weekly roll-up, a situation report of everything that went on that week to their higher headquarters. And for me as the intelligence officer, that meant I was just telling you everything that went on in the world of the bad guys. So this is what I am doing. We are here to talk about everything that went on in the world of cults and in my world of cults this week. And we will, of course, get to the cult of Maga at the end, plus all the cool knitting projects that I have finished. This week, we released an episode of the Hey White Woman podcast where White Woman Whisperer and I were talking with Haley, our podcast producer, about her decision to drop out of school and build her own thing, starting with us as her first clients. People loved this episode. We talked about how worship of the written word is part of white supremacy. This is the podcast where we are deconstructing white supremacy, like the cult that it is. Really, really good. We got so many comments that this was the best episode so far. So go check it out. On Cults and the Culting of America podcast, we release an episode called Good Cult, Bad Cult. So we've gone through the 10, but really 11 part list of what makes something a cult according to me. And then we've now addressed the question, can there be good cults? Because this is the question I get asked the most, usually by men. In my opinion, no, you cannot exploit people for a good cause. But I also think that it's not as simple as good groups and bad groups, right? It's not black and white. I've been working with this analogy recently of, people will say to me, where's the line? Where's the line, right, between groups and organizations? And I'm like, there's no line. And this is the thing, is that people think with extremism, right, there's a line in the sand. But I'm going to tell you a secret about lines in the sand. Draw me a line in the sand. Okay, let's come back tomorrow and see your line in the sand. It will not be there. Yes. When people look at a map, they're like, oh, there's the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. That's easy not to cross. But then when your helicopter is hovering over that area, turns out there's no line there. It's very easy to cross over into extremism. That example was because this is what I've learned as an intelligence officer of a battalion of helicopters over that area. And we were not allowed, obviously, to cross into Pakistan. That was a very, very big deal. And yet it happened relatively regularly because there's no line in the sand. And when you're surrounded by people that look and think just like you, it's really easy to cross the line. That was Style, by the way. World's grumpiest dog. His whole personality is not looking at the camera. So check out those podcasts. I get asked all the time to have a podcast. I have two. Check them out. Thank you for those of you who have followed. We have had 5,000, we've crossed 5,000 downloads for Hey White Women, and we are almost at 8,000 for Cults and the Culting of America. So amazing. Long form stuff is fun. Turns out I can do it in short videos or in long videos. And if you do like short videos, definitely come join me on my TikTok. This is also where I sell my Knitting Cult Lady products, and I'll show you some of that stuff at the end. Okay. So we had a discussion about Girl Scouts on my social media this week, right? Every time you define cults, people are going to come up with these big groups like AA, like the military, like, Mormons, like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, like sororities and fraternities, right? And these are absolutely conversations we should be having. So the first thing about Girl Scouts is I like to do this exercise. Because when we say, is AA a cult? I have had up to and including death threats. But definitely people getting very, very upset. I always say if I had looked at AA and not found anything, I found 10 out of 10. But if I found nothing, just the reaction of the members would be enough to put my cult baby spidey sense on edge. Meanwhile, when you ask, is Girl Scouts a cult? We have a pretty normal conversation and discussion. But it is incredible how many people will justify exploiting the girls as labor so that the girls can have opportunity. So let's talk about that. Right. My part 8 of my 10-part cult list is exploitation of labor. Cults are always exploiting their members' labor. Cults are about labor. That's what they are about. Right. And Girl Scout cookies is problematic. It's a problematic amount of labor for a very small amount of money. But it's not even about the money. It's too much labor for small girls. You can teach entrepreneurial skills in many different ways. And finally, because then people are like, it has to, it's expensive to run an organization. If your multi-million-dollar organization cannot survive without the labor of children, your organization is not good. Going back to that good group, bad group thing that we talked about. It's not that easy. There's no line. Okay, so the exploitation of labor is problematic. And also, Girl Scouts are very guilty of the same thing that we see from AA, we see from nonprofits. We tolerate it from mission-based organizations for some reason, but not from corporations, which is the diffusing of the blame. Imagine I walk into a Kroger and get hurt, and then it's on the news, and then Kroger comes out to say, there are many different Krogers, and you have to find the Kroger that is right for you. Like, no, we wouldn't tolerate that. But these organizations are always doing that. And I'm about to start asking people if they need a diffuser to help them diffuse all that blame. I'm sorry, why is AA allowing people to be trafficked here in Midtown in DC? If someone is using your name without your authorization, you are allowed to sue them. AA is an organization, as is Girl Scouts. You can sue them and you can shut them down. So they're not operating, not under your control. So then answer for them. Get your organization in order. You don't get to do this. We're not accepting this anymore. We're not accepting this. So like every Girl Scouts is different. No. Supervise them, control them, answer for them. If you want to take all the good stuff, you need to answer for the bad stuff too. I'm not accepting this anymore. Okay. The new Mormon underwear. Oh my bejesus. Have we been talking about this all week? Okay, so the Mormon Church changed the format of the sacred Jesus jammies. I don't say things right when I talk about Mormons like any other cults. And sometimes I feel like I need to explain this because Mormons expect everyone to know the details of like Mormonism. And like a cult is not a cult because of what it believes. A cult is a cult because of its actions. So like I said something about like all the people that went to hell because of showing their shoulders. And like many an ex-mo showed up to tell me that Mormons don't believe in hell. I'm like, whatever the bad version of the space travel that they promise you is, we will call that hell. Anyways, so the Mormons were caving to pressure and changed the sacred underwear so that it would allow you to wear kind of like a thick sleeveless or an open sleeve top. And it was supposed to be only in hot climates in Africa, in Australia, where they are growing very quickly. This is in some ways similar to when they were growing very fast in Brazil, and that's when they suddenly decided that African American men could be priesthood holders. There is a very high population of African Brazilian people in Brazil, for those who don't know. I grew up in Brazil, for those who don't know. Okay. So where was I? The underwear, right? So somebody who ex-Mormons have said is certainly going to be excommunicated for this. Somebody in the Australian stake used their official Mormon account to put out the information to everyone. And so then the Mormon Church had to kind of like be like, oh yeah, this was always going to happen. There is, by the way, on my links in the description, already have a tank top that says it was never about the shoulders. Okay, because here's the thing. Appearance control is very, very important. It's not frivolous at all. Otherwise, we wouldn't see it in every situation of coercive control. But appearance control, which usually breaks down into 4 things: hair, body size, body coverage, and underwear. We got 2 of them here. Appearance control is never about appearance. It's always about behavior. It is always about controlling and proscribing what is the proper behavior. This is why it's really important to wear wacky outfits when you get out. And it's also why I understand that ex-Mormons are a little upset because they just lost their shoulders. The Mormons gained their shoulders. The ex-Mos, now it's not like your rebellious thing to wear to show your shoulders. I mean, it still is going to be for so many of them because they still grew up with that. They called them porn shoulders. Yeah. Anyway, I get it. We're going to have to find different wacky things to do, friends. But I think what's happening here is much larger. So I grew up in the Children of God, right? Which is a cult that lasted 10,000 people army around the world, strong for about, 68 to 2009. So that's like 40 years, not 50 years, I think under 50, but not so much math because cult. Okay. And then in 2009, it just kind of like fell really quickly. And here's the thing. The way that cults end is when they fail to keep or recruit the next generation. And I think that, I know that we are going through the largest exodus of religion in American history. They're calling it the Fourth Great Awakening. And we talked about that too. There was 1730s with Jonathan Edwards. Then there was 1830s. This is when you get cults like the Oneida cult. Yes, that Oneida. And Fruitlands, Louisa May Alcott's father's cult. And a lot up in New York State was like the Texas and California of the next era of cults. So then you have the 1930s through kind of like the 1960s, which is revivalist into civil rights and all the cult stuff. And then you have right now, which is people walking away from religion, and like deconstruction music is a whole category. Deconstruction in general is people, pulling apart the worldview that they were given and told was the only right thing. So that is happening en masse right now. But here is what happened with the Children of God. So cults are always about labor, right? So if you give them something that's going to increase labor or increase the money they can earn from the outside world with that labor, they're going to want to use it. So a lot of these cults embrace the internet. And I think this is going to be their ultimate downfall. Okay, so this happened very many times where like, in 1993, a man went on Larry King Live and talked about the family, the Children of God, and said that he had been forced to rape a 10-year-old girl, have sex with a 10-year-old, he said have sex, right? But rape a 10-year-old girl. And Larry King just looks at me and goes, and you did it? That 10-year-old girl was my mother, by the way. But this is 10 years later when she's watching this, and all of the everything is so demonized, and only in the leadership homes did they watch it, I believe, right? Everyone else is so cut off and so isolated. And my mom has told me later, what moments of cognitive dissonance of everyone being like, he's the Antichrist, he's evil, he's a backslider, apostate, these are just lies. And her being like, but it was me. Right? But she didn't think of it as assault or rape either, because that's not the language you're given in a cult, right? This is actually one of the hardest parts of deconstructing your cult experience or your military experience, by the way, is taking off the language that the cult gave you for it and using like what the rest of the world calls it. And that's the chapter I'm writing in Culting of America this month. It is Jargon Jungle, is the chapter on distinguishable vernacular, the cult language, and how cults use and weaponize language. So anyways, going back to this Larry King thing, right? Like that was easy to control because they were like, we don't watch TV, nobody go watch it, and they demonized him. And so nobody went and saw it, right? And the Mormons have been able to do that to their people forever in a fairly impressive way, right? The Mormons have taught cult scholars a lot about isolation while still walking around in the world. At least those that are paying attention. Okay, so But just like children of God, they wanted to use the power of the internet, right? So the Mormon church a decade ago encouraged all of these Mormon mom blogs, and you have now the modern equivalent of just like all of these Mormon influencers. I just did a long interview this week also about all of this that I am trying to now regurgitate to you, and how like, even though we're seeing kind of an explosion, I think it's an explosion of blowing up and imploding, I hope. So this is what happened in the Children of God, right? They let us on the internet. So a decade later, you have this man who leaves, James Penn, and he leaves from the very top of the leadership. He's been in the center of it the whole time. And he writes this open letter to the second and third generation that basically says, yes, all of this is true, all of this abuse, blah, 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 everything. And it's such a dangerous weapon because all it takes is reading it once and you know those things are true. Like you're going to go verify, you're going to go do it, but you know, right? And this is what is happening with the Mormon church. They had effectively, all this stuff that we know about the Mormon church, that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy, all of this, like the Mountain Meadows massacre, all of this history that Americans know about Mormons, most Mormons do not know. They have been told it's a lie. They have been told it's just the outside world, blah, blah, blah. So all they need is one like confirmation and that's it, right? And that's what has been happening with the internet. Another ex-Mormon gave me this piece that like with COVID going online, with church going online, some Mormons who had never gotten online got online. And now they are finding other stuff as well, right? So this is the problem. You give your people a little bit of freedom. You know, the Children of God did something else interesting in 1998. They gave us a Charter of Rights and Responsibilities. And they were forced to, by a judge, write down what the rules were because they kept saying, we have these rules. And the judge was like, show it. So they wrote down this Charter of Rights and Responsibilities. The problem was, at this point, they have a group of 10,000 people that have given up the idea of rights for the last 30 years. I mean, he would regularly say, this is not a democracy. This is a dictatorship, right? And then you give them back the concept of rights, right, along with the internet. Like, this is no bueno. So what happens is people start leaving. And yes, you're using the internet. Yes, you're making more money than ever. But at some point, it reaches a tipping point. And it doesn't matter if you have all the money in the world, if all of the children are gone. So that is kind of what happened with Children of God. And they saw the writing on the wall. And some of those very same children convinced their parents who were running it to be like, all right, we're shutting this thing down. Jesus called us and told us that he might not be coming back in our lifetime. So, you know, all that stuff we told you before about be in the world but not of it and blah, blah, blah. Don't put your kids in school. Don't get real jobs. Like, JK, go have fun. Yeah, that was great. And it's still, but hey, we're still here online, like for your tithe and to give you stuff. And so I think, yeah, of course, like, right, Mormonism at this point, like it is, first of all, there are many Mormon cults, right? Then there is like the church, but it's also a high control religious system, right? Which gives people a recipe of how to do like single family cults, essentially. We see this in Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses as well. There's like this overarching cult, but also you have this single family cult, right? This is different than the Children of God, where you lived in these big communes and were breaking up individual families, for example. So yes, I do kind of feel like Mormonism is collapsing, and of course we don't know what that will look like, the you know, post-collapse Mormon church, but apparently someone we don't like walked by. And we will see what happens there. We've been talking this week about military rape culture, and I think last week I mentioned discovering Margaret Singer's 19 Reasons Why the Marine Corps is Not a Cult. And like, I disagree with every single one of them. And I had someone reach out to me who's like organizational psychologist and 17 years in the Army Reserves, I think, and was like, but, I want to, I guess, call me in on my comparisons to the military. And quite frankly, the truth is, look, the reason I have the language to rebut everyone else's military exemptions in the cult world is because of all the work they have done. And I have read all their stuff, but I have the military experience. I do believe I am the expert in the world on cults and the American military together compared to each other. So I can make my case, right? Even, this one I love is like, well, the military has a justice system and cults don't have a justice system. So first of all, they do have internal justice systems. And part of that is usually convincing you to not use external justice systems. So like one of her points is that, well, Congress oversees the military and cults have no oversight. So again, not true. Congress could oversee any cult they wanted. They just don't. But they did, for example, in Jonestown, right? That was, Congressman Leo Ryan. Okay. So who they unalived, killed, by the way. Yeah. Little TikTok cult language there. Unalived. But also there's nothing to oversee if they've encouraged you to not use the official channels, right? But second of all, every cult has a broad base of members who experiences only the good stuff. So in the military, let's call that men. And then I laugh at you in women telling me that the cult has a justice system that works for its members. No, it doesn't. But whenever people can't make their case that the military is not a cult, then they start to get frustrated and they start to say, well, then what's the point? We have to have a definition. But do we? Because as a cult baby, I hate your cult definition. I hate mine too. Because you know what cults do with definitions, with pretty little listicles? They take them and use your words and your expertise to train their people on how they aren't a cult, right? Ask me how I know. So, I put together a definition and then I started writing a book to explain that definition. And I think if I had just started writing a book, I would have been like, okay, it takes a book to explain. But then since I started all my social media channels at the same time, I now realize that it takes like thousands of hours of talking about it in nuance and storytelling and pattern finding to really understand it. So I'm going to tell these kids I'm going to speak to next week at Jefferson University in Philly. If your professors expect you to be impressed with them because they've written a book on their topic, ask them how their TikTok channel is doing. But the point, they're like, what is the point? So first of all, the point is I don't work for anyone. This is a giant thought exercise for me. I just want to compare things to cults and push people to have realizations. The second is I'm not an organizational psychologist. I am a disorganizational psychologist. I don't actually care about the groups. I don't actually know if you can have good groups or non-culty groups under capitalism and certainly under American capitalism. Right? And I've given up on trying to help a group be better. What I am here to do is to be the intelligence officer for people, just like I always have been and very good at. To show you the tactics, techniques, and procedures of cults. This is kind of what we did in Afghanistan. In Iraq, they tracked all the different groups we were fighting. In Afghanistan, they were kind of like, it's hard to tell sometimes. So we're just going to lump them all in as insurgents, and we are going to look at their tactics, right? I'm not getting in a political thing here. We did what we did, but it's useful, right? And I said to this guy, even if, because he's like, oh, so then how do we know if a group, what's the line, right? What's the difference? And I'm like, it's always low threat. It's never no threat, right? You never say there's no threat. There's always a threat. There's always a threat to your group. And the second you consider yourself a good group, there goes your perspective on that threat, right? And this was what I didn't see any of my peers really considering, that these big capitalist organizations you're going to go work for aren't just like good groups. But anyway, turns out I can make my case pretty good. So I beg anyone to go take Margaret Singer's 19 Reasons the Army or the Military Isn't a Cult, and let's have the discussion. But even this book I'm writing, like, it's not going to give anyone any easy answers. And that's the other thing I say. Like, my job is not to make you feel comfortable that, like, oh, your groups are good. This happens all the time on my TikTok. People love my channel, but then as soon as I talk about a group that they're in, all you do is talk about cults. All you see is cults everywhere. I got told that this week, and I just responded with, yes. That's why we're all here. I see cult people. And I can help you understand groups that have hurt you in the past, groups that are hurting you now, and groups that might try to hurt you in the future by looking at the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the world's most extreme groups. And if you like that little techniques, and procedures, but you're not military, that's a military thing. That's a military intelligence thing. Okay, so we've been talking about rape culture, though, in the military, which, of course, is hugely a topic of my book that literally I set out to write to show that my experience in the Children of God sex cult that preached pedophilia and the United States military were not that significantly different. And hey, I make my case. The U.S. military certainly doesn't come off as the better cult. Check that out if you'd like signed copies. The links are in the description. It is also on audio. And every time we bring up rape, okay, so we're talking about, first of all, like, this was a job where under the combat ban, because they had to make sure they were keeping women out of combat, they made us get naked on a table and be, like, looked up the vagina by usually an old man doctor before they could then slot us in as second-class citizens, right? Because your career is not going to be nearly as good because you're kept out of the line of operations. And come to find out, many, many, many people were definitely assaulted during this. Had doctors sticking their fingers inside them in all kinds of ways, and it's horrible. And if that happened to you, please go file that as part of your disability PTSD claim and get money for that. Then you have men coming in. So you have several responses when I tell this story. People trying to be like, so they did that to all of us. Okay, because a large amount of people experienced a trauma doesn't make it not traumatic. In fact, one of the ways that we as humans push ourselves through things that are very traumatic is by telling ourselves that it's not so bad. Other people have it worse. It's happening to all of us, so we're just fine. We are not fine. That was not okay. Many of those girls were 17 years old, okay? Like, this is horrible. And then, of course, some dudes want to be like, this is why women shouldn't be in the military. One guy was like, asked me, he said, I've heard from men that women couldn't be in the military because then they would get kidnapped and men would risk their lives to save them from being raped by, I think it's crazy that these soldiers are going around saying they would risk their lives to stop us from being raped when they are the ones raping us. I just saw a statistic from the Same Wounded Warrior survey that said 44% of women who have worn the uniform report being sexually assaulted, almost half of your organization. 3 out of 4 women who were deployed report that. And these are our men raping us. No, they're not keeping us out of combat because they're afraid of us getting raped. They're keeping us out of combat because they are afraid of us competing with them and being better at it than them, which we have in many ways proven to be since I first was part of these little experiments on the sand in 2011. You read all about that in my book, Uncultured. And I always have to address that. People are like, do you think you can even have a war without rape? And I'm like, I mean, I do. You know why? Because I went to war for 18 months and I raped no people. It's quite easy, in fact. Yeah. Rape is about power. It is never about sex. We talked about the hair, how the ponytail or the perfect bun regulations that the Army had, in addition to upholding white supremacy and all of the stuff that appearance regulations do for cults, it was another avenue for those in female bodies to be assaulted, harassed, and abused. Because here's the thing. So you'd have a perfect bun in uniform until 2014 in workout uniform, in 2021 in fatigues. And this is in the Army. You could have like a tucked up French braid. You could have hair shorter, like a short bob, but it had to be contoured to your head, right? So that's about it. Okay, so you have to have this perfect bun, which sits back here. It can't sit on top of your head, by the way. So it's sitting back here perfect while you are running your 2-mile test, which if you fail twice, your career is over. And while you are shooting with your rifle, what they call qualifying with your rifle. One of the things you have to do is lay down in the prone. So you're laying down behind your rifle like this. And because we don't have helmets built for women that have a bun hole or in any way ratioed for us, your bun is going to push your helmet over your eyes and make this impossible to do, right? So, and because both of these things are tied to your career. So women would get stopped in the middle of running and told to fix their hair and then fail the run. Same for shooting on a live range, which is a timed thing. Having sergeants yelling at them to fix their bun. Okay? And then, now it's like, hey, come here with me, right? And all you need to assault someone is isolation and power over them. And even when they closed this avenue of predation, it was like the sergeant major of the Army being like, hey, ladies, we know that your ponytails and your earrings and your nails are like important to your identity. Fuck you. Oy, oy, oy. Anyway, women's hair would also get moldy from having to be in buns all the time, especially when you're in a training scenario or deployed where you're only allowed to wear. So when we were deployed for a whole year, we were only allowed to be in fatigues or in your PT uniform. But at least on a deployment, you could wash your hair at night and then leave it out drying while you were asleep. Unless, of course, there was a rocket attack, then you would have to get up, get your hair in a bun before going out to the bunker. Otherwise, you get yelled at. But you better get in that bunker in under a minute. Otherwise, you're going to get yelled at. Okay. But at least we can more or less avoid the moldy hair. When you're in training, like when I was in basic training and officer school, where you have to work out as a unit, go get 45 minutes to like everyone shower and get ready, and then have your hair up for the rest of the day, including when you're in the evening in your workout uniform again, until your head hits that pillow. Like, horrible. Horrible. Shockingly, though, women have been allowed to have braids down, ponytails since 2001. And you know what? Tucker Carlson, China has not invaded, nor has hand-to-hand combat. That's the other thing. The hand-to-hand combat, it's harder. Yeah, when was the last time we did hand-to-hand combat? Like, get the F out of my face. Okay. Whew. You can tell my book is spicy, I hope. Talked a lot about male privilege as a result of these conversations, and I told the story of how I explained to Mr. Knitting Cult Lady male privilege. Okay, so he came to me and he said, all right, I want to understand, because I know the things you say are true, and I know that, you know, all of this stuff, but also I feel like I worked for everything that I have. And I looked at him and I said to him, babe, in 1989, when you were 8 years old and Top Gun came out and you decided then and there that you wanted to be a military pilot, and everyone in your life fell behind helping you make that happen, would they have done that for your sister? And since he had a sister who was younger than him, and therefore understood that they wouldn't have, he understood that. But also, women couldn't be military pilots in 1989. So that's an example of both the personal sexism of the family, but also systemic sexism. Like, you couldn't be one even if you did have the family that was going to help you. So anyway, just a little piece there that might be useful to someone else. He was open-minded and wanted to understand, so that was helpful too. But yeah, I write quite a bit about understanding privilege, including my own white privilege, in my second book, Un-American, which is not out as a book yet, but it is a 6-hour video book of me reading it aloud. And this is after I found out some crazy information about my ex-husband, who's briefly in Uncultured. And the U.S. military was asking me to testify against him for him to be kicked out for something truly terrible. If you would like to know, you can Google the name William Jeffrey Poole. And it made me realize I had to reevaluate everything. And my story of the first time I heard the term white privilege was somebody was trying to use me as an example of how it didn't exist. And this somebody was another 6'2", blonde, blue-eyed helicopter pilot who was claiming that he had such a great career because he was always ready. He always had a backpack, blah, blah, blah. And he's standing there talking to me, one of the first women in deliberate ground combat who helped take down the combat ban just a year before. Military still hadn't been fully integrated. Like, you had so many more opportunities than me because you were born with a penis and I wasn't. Which, by the way, one of the lines I am proudest of getting into Uncultured, published by a traditional publisher, is, Sir K, are you just mad that since you failed to show me a man that can do a push-up with his penis, you failed to defend why the military should have a combat ban against women according to their own standards? So this guy, and he goes, I mean, you of all people, Captain Mestyanek, should understand that there's no such thing as white privilege because you came here from nothing, from another country, and like pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. And okay, first of all, that phrase exists because it's impossible. It's impossible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's an impossibility. But also you have to have boots. But when he said this to me, it was like, I was like, oh, there's a term for it, for what I've been experiencing. Because the only way I knew how to explain it was people are treating me better than I deserve. Better than an indigent 15-year-old or a very poor 20-year-old working her way through college, like, deserved to be treated. And that was white privilege. And that is really what I'm going through in all of Uncultured is about, or Un-American, is about power, privilege, whiteness, otherness, and what it means to be an American. And it's part of what led me to doing the podcast with White Woman Whisperer, because I realized that according to my own model of deconstruction, even though I've had the crack in the brainwashing and walked away from the cult of white supremacy, I still have at least another 5 years of my decade of deconstruction to do. And so we're doing that out loud on a podcast. People tell me it's good. Okay. There was an essay by Heather Cox Richardson. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I really, really encourage people to go read it. It is really comparing Trump to Hitler, and you see what is at stake here. On Saturday, September 7th, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump predicted that his plan to deport 15 to 20 million people currently living in the United States would be bloody. He also promised to prosecute his political opponents, including, he wrote, lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters, and election officials. My husband and I have realized that we are also probably the enemy within, for sure. Retired chair of Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley told journalist Bob Woodward that Trump is a fascist to the core, the most dangerous person to this country, which is also what his niece, a psychologist, has said about him. Most dangerous person in the world. Most dangerous man in the world. On October 14th, Trump told Fox News Channel host Maria Bartiromo that he thought enemies within the United States were more dangerous than foreign adversaries, and he thought that the military should stop those radical left lunatics on Election Day. Since then, he has been talking a lot about the enemy from within, which is quoting Hitler, by the way. Specifically naming Representative Adam Schiff and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, both Democrats from California, as bad people. Blah, blah, blah. His references have come so frequent that his former press secretary, Jen Psaki, not his, I don't think, says that they are his closing argument for the 2024 election. Okay, she says some really crazy stuff like Hitler promised that he was not going to abolish the Constitution, and it took him 3 months to dismantle it. Like, please go read this essay. Just Heather Cox Richardson. She also has a YouTube channel. She's a political writer. She wrote a book called How the South Won the Civil War. And please vote. Just please vote. Yes, there are so many issues. Yes, there are. But, like, we have to put out the fire in our house. Like, we can't have the cult leader just end America. Please. Please. Also, with cult of Maga, Trump had apparently, one of the things that came out was that Trump had volunteered to pay for Vanessa Guan's funeral. You've heard me talk about Vanessa Guan before. She was a young Mexican-American soldier who went missing and was not looked for, and under the Trump administration, by the way. And we finally found her body in 3 shallow graves. Part of the reason I decided to publish my book was what happened to Vanessa Guan, and I wanted everyone to know what the military culture is really like for the daughters of America when we disappear behind the high commune walls of the Department of Defense. Anyways, when Trump found out it was going to cost $60,000, he said, quote, "It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury a fucking Mexican." And then told Chief of Staff Mark Meadows not to pay. He added, "Fucking people trying to rip me off. No money was sent to the grieving family." So, you know, among other things, if that's the person you want to be your president, just, finally, I am writing a article that hopefully will be published next week about how significant it is that Kamala Harris has addressed child sexual abuse all throughout her career, but as the front-running presidential candidate, as someone who grew up in a sex cult in a world where children are not protected, and as a counterpoint to Trump and J.D. Vance, who are running on platforms of family values and making any danger about the other and strangers and marginalized groups, which harms those people, but also harms children. Because 3 out of 4 children who are sexually abused are abused by members of their own family or in their churches. Studies clearly show that it's pastors that are raping children and not drag queens. And that is not the message that is sent. But the biggest message I have in the essay is that the silence around taboo topics really needs to go away. You know, I was told when trying to publish Uncultured, I got 19 rejections, right? And a lot of it was, sorry, Children of God abuse is too dark. I also got a lot of, we don't tell the stories of military women because nobody buys them. And why, I wonder? Is it because they're also too dark? Like, we know it's going to be too dark. We know that the military side of my book is going to be almost just as bad as the sex cult side of my book. And I don't agree. I don't think anything we have survived is too awful to talk about. I think it's too awful not to. I think the children need to know that it's not okay what is happening, and that adults who were assaulted as children need help. There's a lot of legislation that Kamala could really push through. Not to mention 150 sexual assault survivors just took out a full New York Times page ad on why they think that Kamala being the president is going to be very, very good for survivors and for victims. And, you know, we all know what Trump took out a full page ad for in the New York Times. Racism. Yeah. Okay. And just, I mean, I imagine how much change could be had by leaders who actually care. Yes, she has a problematic prosecutor record, but in this issue, she has shown dedication from the time when her best friend in high school told her she was being assaulted by her stepfather, and she immediately reacted to protect the girl, move them in with her, but also it made her decide to become a prosecutor, and she has always kept the rights of children in mind. And it is so rare to hear this from high-ranking officials in the government because children don't vote, so they don't care, right? And I really do think that like making the world safer for children is going to fix a lot of the problems, because the not raped, not beaten children are going to grow up and like build a better world instead of all of us trying to do it so deeply traumatized. So yeah, hopefully that is going to come out. More in the cult of Maga. You have Tucker Carlson being really truly disgusting, describing spanking in such a way that makes it so obvious that it is sexual. And spanking children is assault, hitting children is assault. But when it is done on the buttocks or upper thighs or other places, it is also sexual assault. It is often also done naked by religious spankers, which is extremely gross and violent and affects us for the rest of our lives. And they're doing this like on a national stage, just idolizing all of this horror. Please don't vote for this man. Like, what are we doing? How are we here again? He's told us what he wants to do. He's told us he wants to demolish the Constitution and never have voting again and pursue the enemy from within. Again, me, bloodily out of this country. Many of you also, maybe. Please don't vote for this man. And now for some nitpicking. Let me show you the things I have done. Knitting Cult Lady. So first of all, this is one of my faves, and I've never shown it off before. Just art scarf. I made this for my last New York trip. Now I'm going on a New York trip again because our host daughter is coming from Brazil for Christmas. She's a 24-year-old medical resident now. Very exciting. She lived with us when she was 16. We've been down there to visit her right before COVID, and now she's coming up here. And we're, of course, going to take her to New York. We're also going to go see Hamilton. Well, me and Mr. Knitting Cult Lady are, but we have to keep that a secret from Knitting Cult Baby because she loves Hamilton, but she's not right. Okay, so I took this leather jacket. It's inside out, but I've cut off the arms, and I'm making sleeves. So that's going to be very, very fun. These are two of my collars that got sold. So I sell these pre-made collars for like $45 on my TikTok. My Love Bomb collars. This one has all kinds of really fun yarn. Those are going out today. And now, oh look, here's another one of the collars that I made that is not sold. So that one is just fun. And it's fun because then I wear them, and then when they sell, I wash them and set them and send them out to people. Wait, does this have a hole in it? No. Okay. So this is going to be my coat for Kamala's inauguration. And it looks giant, but we're going to be outside in January, right? So it's going to be over a lot of things. So it's made to be giant. And, whoops, now it's hooked on something. Arg. And it's going to be covered in cats. So I'm asking people to send me if they crochet, like a crochet amigurumi cat, they're called, if you would like to do one. Or if you have like a beanie baby cat. And I'm making cats. I'm getting some beanies on eBay. And basically there's going to be two front pockets. And there's going to be like cats climbing out of them. And there's going to be cats climbing up the arms and sitting on the shoulders. And the inside's going to be lined with silk scarves that are covered in cats, which I'm also looking for 2 silk scarves covered in cats. If you would like to be part of Knitting Cult Lady's Knitting Cat Lady jacket to wear in honor of Shady Vance as we celebrate his demise, my P.O. box will be in the description as well. That didn't pause it at all, but that's okay. Finally, this is one of my scarfigans. That is where I take a scarf, turn it into a cardigan. Of course, the one I'm wearing is too. So I made this purple one, and I made it with fuzzy, we call these the cult coats. So I made it with fuzzy cult coat sleeves. And then I also made this collar with this very lovely amethyst that's very special to me from Brazil, where I grew up. And they go together, so that one's not for sale, of course. I also bought, oh my God, I got like 21 pounds of old and broken jewelry on eBay. So that was fun. Got to sort through all of that. Made these canvases with my daughter where all the single earrings hang, because you can use single earrings as pendants. So like both of these things on the back were earrings. And I just put them on the thing to make it cute. And this one, and I'll post this video as well of making this, because I did a whole tutorial of how to make a scarf again. But this is going to be, here, I probably have to take off this. This is going to be one that I wear to Hamilton with my Oscar dress that I posted a few weeks ago. And of course, I will make videos of all of this. Do a video of the whole wardrobe that I've created to go to New York. Anyway, this one came out super nice, super comfy chenille sleeves. Got all that fringe at the bottom. And folks, that has been me. That has been your occult situation report for this week. And I will hopefully be back next week with more.